everyone. Welcome to today's Dwelling in the Word. This week and next, I invite you to dwell with me in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy simply means repetition of the law. And it's a repetition of the law because it's been 40 years since God's people stood at the mountain and worshiped the Lord. And Moses went up on the mountain to receive from the Lord the commands and the law that God wanted his people to obey as they entered into this covenant relationship with Yahweh, the creator of heaven and earth. And so Deuteronomy repeats a lot of those laws and those commandments, but also rehearses the history of the past 40 years. So 5 chapters a day, listen to it, read it, and just dwell in this incredible story and the teachings that God gave to his people so long ago. Coming back to this idea of 40 years later, God's people have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and the generation that is now getting ready to go into the promised land, their parents and their grandparents have all passed away. Everybody who was over the age of 20 has passed away, and now this new generation is on the cusp of doing what their parents and grandparents had not been able to do. That is to go into the promised land. So these people have never before seen battle. These people have never planted trees or planted fields and harvested those fields. These people have never built towns and cities. These people have never done any of the things that God is now calling them to do as they enter into the promised land that he promised so long ago to their forefather, Abraham. And as they are preparing to finally go into the promised land, God sends Moses to stand before them, to reassure them, and to encourage them not to repeat the mistakes of the past. The reason that their parents and grandparents had been unable to enter into the promised land is because they gave in to fear. They allowed themselves to be anxious, and they allowed themselves, as a result of this fear and anxiety, to grumble and complain against God and to say, we can't do this. This is too hard. This is impossible. We don't want to do this. And it was all about their lack of faith and confidence in the Lord that, as a result, caused them to melt in fear. Today we live in a world that is filled with anxious people. And as a result of the anxiety and fear that so many of us in our world are living with, we live in a world that's full of anger and grumbling and complaining. We are God's people. I remind you, we're God's people. Therefore, we are to be people of peace and people of confidence who are not worried and stressed out about what's going to happen tomorrow. But we live by the words of Jesus, who told us to live one day at a time, not worrying about tomorrow, because tomorrow will worry about itself. But instead, we seek God's kingdom and his righteousness, trusting that the Lord will provide everything that is needed for our lives. And so let's hear God speaking to his people long ago as they are walking into the great unknown, radically new experiences, things that they have never done before. And God saying to them, I don't want you to be afraid of this. I want you to trust in me. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 6 through 8. Moses has assembled all of God's people, and he says to them these words. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. Speaking of the kings and the nations that they are going to be fighting against. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. And then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them. And you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and he will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. These are words that I believe that you and I need to take to heart today, because we don't know what tomorrow will bring. We have a lot of people again in our world who are anxious about the election. Who's going to be elected? This time next year, as we enter into the new year in January and go forward, what's going to happen? Where will our nation go? People are worried about the fires over on the West Coast. People are worried about how many more hurricanes are coming, and how are we even going to deal with all the hurricanes that have already come? The pandemic experience, when is it going to be over? How many more lives are going to be lost? When are things going to be normal again? So many questions, so many uncertainties, so much fear, so much anxiety, and we as God's people must be people who listen to God and say with him and to one another, do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. The Lord is with us. The Lord will go before us. The one who commanded the winds and the waves and said to them, peace, be still, and they submitted to his voice, is with us today and always to the very end of the age. And we have nothing to be afraid of. Our God, the God who created heaven and earth, the God who one day will return again in glory and will raise the dead back to life and restore all things. The God of heaven and earth is with us. He's with you, and we have nothing to fear. So let's hear it one more time, and let's consider this message one more time. Be strong and courageous today and every day, believing that the Lord will always be with you, just as he promised. And our God cannot lie. And our God will bring you through whatever it is that you are facing today and always.